close your eyes. Now cover your ears. What do you hear? Nothing. What do you see? Only darkness. This is the world Helen Keller lived in from the age of 19 months. No voices, no birdsong, no pages turning, no colors spilling across the sky, only silence and shadow. Most of us would lose hope. Most of us would feel small, trapped, and alone. But Helen Keller did not. This is the story of a girl who refused to be defined by darkness, and of a teacher who refused to let that darkness win. It's a story about patience, grit, language, love, and the wild, stubborn belief that a closed door can still be opened. Are you ready to step into her world? Chapter 1: Darkness Falls. Helen Adams Keller was born on June 27, 1880, in Tuscumbia, Alabama, a small town with dirt lanes shaded by old trees and summers that smelled of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. Her father, Arthur Keller, had worn a gray uniform in the Civil War and now edited the local newspaper. Her mother, Kate, had quick hands and a gentler voice, the kind you could almost feel in the air even if you couldn't hear it. In those first 19 months, Helen was all motion and curiosity. She toddled toward whatever glittered, tugged at tablecloths, squealed at dogs, and imitated the sounds around the dinner table. Her parents traded exhausted smiles over her head as she leaned into language, one babble at a time. Then the fever came. It arrived the way storms do in late winter, suddenly, completely. Her small body burned. Cool cloths were pressed to her forehead. Prayers were whispered. Footsteps paced the floorboards until dawn. When the fever finally broke, relief flooded the room like light through a window. But the light did not reach Helen. Kate spoke her name. Helen did not turn. Arthur clapped loudly. She did not startle. A candle was waved before her eyes. She did not track it. The world had gone silent. The world had gone dark. She was blind. She was deaf. And no doctor could change it. Try to imagine being not yet two, your mind sparking with new connections, and suddenly the bridges to other people, eyes and ears, are gone. How do you ask for water? How do you say you are hungry or afraid? Without words, frustration arrives like a weather front and stays. Helen learned to communicate with improvised gestures. A nod for yes, a shake for no, a pull of the hand to say, come. But the older she grew, the bigger her world became inside, and the smaller it felt outside. Tantrums followed. Dishes were smashed. Doors slammed. Family members were struck by a flailing arm or an angry kick. Arthur, practical and frightened, muttered about institutions. Kate, resolute and tender, refused. There must be a way to reach her, she said. There must be. Hope often knocks softly before changing everything. In March 1887, hope came up the path to the Keller house in the form of a 20-year-old teacher named Anne Mansfield Sullivan. Anne's life was its own lesson in endurance. She had grown up poor, lost her mother young, and spent part of her childhood in a crowded almshouse. An eye disease had left her with damaged vision. Surgeries had helped, but not fully. What she did have, fiercely, was intelligence, stubbornness, and a belief that a locked mind could be unlocked with the right key. Helen would later call this the most important day I remember in my life. Anne began immediately. She handed Helen a doll and spelled DOLL into her palm. Helen copied the shapes quickly, the way you copy a dance move before you know the song. But the meaning, the bridge from sign to thing, was missing. Anger rolled in like thunder. Helen threw the doll, it shattered. Anne did not scold, she reset. Day after day she spelled CUPMILK, guiding Helen's hands to the cup, the milk, the bread. She insisted on manners, on order at the table, on gentle hands. When Helen resisted, Anne stood firm, not in punishment, but in faith. There is a mind in there, and it will come out to meet us. To give lessons space from the household's well-meaning chaos, Anne moved with Helen into a small cottage on the property. For 2 weeks they lived in a rhythm of study, play, and rest. Discipline softened into trust. A ladder was being built, rung by rung, and both teacher and student were climbing. Chapter 2. The Water Pump Miracle. The breakthrough came on April 5, 1887. The spring air was mild. The pump's iron handle was cool beneath Anne's hand as she worked it up and down. Water gushed, a sound Helen could not hear but could feel, faintly, as vibrations under her bare feet on the packed earth. Anne thrust one of Helen's hands beneath the stream. The water was cold and alive against her skin. Into the other palm she spelled WATER, slowly. Again, carefully. At first, nothing. The letters were only shapes. Then Helen's head tilted. A stillness fell over her body, like a field of grass suddenly windless. The rushing liquid on one hand, the moving shapes in the other. Something connected. She stiffened, pulled back, and urgently pushed her palm forward again, demanding repetition. WATER, again, again. She tore herself free and ran her hands over the ground. Name this. The pump, name this. Anne's dress, name this. By nightfall, she had learned 30 words. It was as if someone had thrown open the shutters of a darkened room. The world was full of names, and names could be held. Later, Helen would write, "That living word awakened my soul, gave it light, hope, joy, set it free." The exclamation point is not an ornament. It is the feeling of a mind discovering it has a sky. Chapter 3. Words, Voice, and Learning. After the water pump, learning did not proceed, it galloped. Words were collected like seashells after a storm. Mother, father, teacher, flower, earth, love. Anne taught everywhere. At the table, in the garden, along the path to the gate. A leaf was not only a shape, but also a sequence of letters. Rain was both a feeling on skin and a pattern in the palm. Abstract ideas arrived last. Think, hope. Why, yesterday, tomorrow. But they arrived. With every new word, another door opened. The tantrums quieted. The house exhaled. Reading came next. Braille, patterns of raised dots, spread under Helen's fingertips like constellations on a clear night. She learned to write with a slate and stylus, pricking dots into thick paper. Later, she used a special typewriter. She learned arithmetic by touching pegs and counting boards, geography by tracing raised maps with a curious index finger. But Helen wanted more than words in the hand. She wanted a voice of her own. For that, she learned to place her fingers lightly on a teacher's lips and throat, feeling the vibrations of consonants and the shape of vowels. Try, fail, try again. Hours of practice became weeks, then months. Frustration sometimes boiled over into tears. Anne's patience sometimes frayed to threads. Apologies were spelled into palms, and the work resumed. Speech came. Halting, imperfect, precious. Not everyone could understand her, but she could form words, shape breath, and send her thoughts into the air. It mattered to her that she try. "It will be my bridge to other people," she said. And so it was. The next horizon was school. Helen attended the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston, where her world widened to include classmates with their own stories of darkness and light. There she discovered shared laughter, friendly competition, and the wild satisfaction of solving a problem after refusing to give up. She then studied at the Wright-Humason School for the Deaf in New York City, refining her speech and language, and at the Cambridge School for Young Ladies to prepare for college entrance exams. Picture it. Greek verbs and Latin declensions negotiated through the swift choreography of fingers in a palm. Algebra worked out with raised line diagrams. Literature tasted in Braille like a new fruit. The goal was Radcliffe College, Harvard's coordinate institution for women. The idea of a deaf-blind young woman sitting in lecture halls at the turn of the century was, to many, ridiculous. But to Helen and Anne, it was necessary. So in 1900, she entered Radcliffe. How does a deaf-blind student attend lectures? With logistics and grit. Professors provided notes. Classmates shared manuscripts. Anne sat beside Helen in every class, spelling every sentence rapidly into her hand. Helen read Braille versions of textbooks or had material transcribed, sometimes by volunteers, sometimes by paid assistants after frantic fundraising. Exams were administered by touch and by trust. It was exhausting. There were nights when even courage went to bed early. But there was also joy. Joy in ideas, in hard paragraphs finally understood, in the fierce pleasure of doing something difficult and doing it well. In 1904, Helen graduated cum laude, the first deaf-blind person ever to receive a Bachelor of Arts degree. The diploma carried her name and, invisibly, Anne's too. Chapter 4. The World Opens. College was not the summit. It was the trailhead. Helen wrote the story of my life, dictating through fingers and typewriter the arc from darkness to language. She lectured, with Anne as interpreter, filling auditoriums where curiosity mingled with skepticism, and then, invariably, admiration. She met Alexander Graham Bell, who had guided her family years earlier. She met Mark Twain, who adored her wit and scolded anyone who treated her like a porcelain saint. She met presidents from Grover Cleveland to John F. Kennedy. Her circle included philanthropists who underwrote her work and ordinary people who pressed coins into her hand after talks, saying, "For the children, for the books, for the next one." She traveled Europe, Asia, the Middle East, where she asked the same questions in each new language. Where are the schools? Where are the teachers? Where is the library? How do we include those who have been kept out? Blindness, she insisted, was not the tragedy. The tragedy was a door locked from the outside. During wars and economic depressions, she visited hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and homes, touching faces with her fingertips, greeting people by spelling her name into their palms, and reminding them gently that their worth could not be measured by what they had lost. Every hero's story includes those who carried water and held ladders. For Helen, the constant was Anne Sullivan. Teacher, translator, friend, discipline and devotion wrapped in the same black dress. The intimacy of their communication is hard to imagine. Hands on hands. Thoughts moved not as sound, but as pressure and pattern. In public, they seemed to share one body, one speaking, one listening, both composing. In private, they disagreed, reconciled, and kept working, because the work mattered more than pride. Anne's health, never strong, worsened over time. Polly Thompson joined their household as a companion and assistant, and later became Helen's primary interpreter as Anne's strength faded. When Anne died in 1936, a silence fell that even words could not fill. But Helen continued, carrying their shared mission forward. Grief did not erase duty. It made it tender and urgent. It is tempting to flatten Helen into inspiration alone, to polish her until she shines without edges. But the truth is more interesting. She had convictions about women's suffrage, labor rights, pacifism, and the obligations of a just society, and she spoke them, sometimes to the discomfort of those who preferred her quiet. She believed that a life redeemed by education must be spent widening the road for others. Critics told her to stay in her lane. She asked who had drawn the lines. She was not naive. She was insistent. She did not pretend suffering was noble. She insisted it could be overcome by individual effort, yes, but also by community and design. Although the world is full of suffering, she said, it is also full of the overcoming of it. The sentence carries both a diagnosis and a prescription. It tells us what is and what can be. Chapter 5. A Life Fully Lived. Public figures can seem unreal, posters more than people. But Helen's private life held ordinary joys. She loved the feel of a dog's fur beneath her hands and the warmth of sun on her face on a porch she could map by step count and memory. She enjoyed jokes. She kept friends. She wrote letters, so many letters, tilting the page just so, counting lines with her fingertips to keep them straight. She read voraciously in Braille, poetry that lifted like a song she could feel through the wrist, science that hummed with discovery, history that made the present less lonely. She gardened by touch, identifying plants by stem and leaf. She learned the moods of weather from wind on her skin and the tremble of thunder through floorboards. Illness visited, fatigue too. Public demands sometimes ground down private reserves. Still, she showed up, with a hand extended, with a story ready, with a question to ask. In later years, she received honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, but her favorite recognitions were smaller. A classroom funded, a library of Braille books opened, a note from a teenager who, after reading her story, decided against giving up. In the early 1960s, after a stroke, Helen traveled less. Polly Thompson had died. Other companions helped her manage the load of letters and requests. The world had changed. Television flickered in living rooms. Jetliners stitched continents together, and civil rights marches shook streets. Helen watched with her fingertips and her mind. Her belief that dignity must be made practical through ramps and books and training and work did not fade. When she died in 1968 at the age of 87, her ashes were placed in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., near Anne's. The symmetry is right. The student and the teacher side by side, as they had been in life. But the story does not end at a stone wall engraved with names. It lives wherever a teacher refuses to give up on a difficult student, wherever a city installs a tactile paving strip at a crosswalk, wherever a library orders another shelf of Braille books because the waiting list is too long. Chapter 6. Lessons and your water moment. What can we learn? Not as spectators warming our hands at someone else's fire, but as people who must build our own. Language is liberation. The miracle at the water pump was not magic. It was mapping. When the word water touched the sensation water, the world became nameable. The nameable becomes thinkable. The thinkable becomes possible. If you are stuck, ask yourself, what thing in your life needs a better name? Mentorship multiplies strength. Anne did not give Helen a mind. She gave her access to her own. She was the ladder, and she taught Helen to climb it alone. Who has held the ladder for you? For whom are you willing to hold it steady, even when your arms shake? Environments create outcomes. The barrier was not blindness. The barrier was a page with no braille, a lecture without notes, a door with a step no cane could find. When we change environments, classrooms, offices, apps, we change what is possible. Perseverance is a practice, not a personality trait. Courage didn't arrive as a thunderclap. It accumulated. 10 more minutes of practice. One more attempt at a sound. A second draft after the first was bad. A trip taken while still tired. Small stubbornness, repeated, becomes strength. Joy is resistance. It matters that Helen delighted in sun-warm porches and a dog's enthusiastic greeting. Joy is not naivete. It is fuel. The point of overcoming is not to become a machine. It is to be a person who can still be moved. Your voice has many channels. Helen used fingers, paper, lips, typewriters, and interpreters. When one channel is blocked, seek another. If you cannot be heard in the room, write the letter. If the letter fails, Build the library. Stories are mirrors only if you bother to look. So, what do you see in this one? Maybe you are facing a problem that feels like a sealed door. You've knocked. No answer. You're tired. You're angry. The room feels small. Ask yourself, what is my water? The path where sensation and meaning can meet. What is one small action that can translate chaos into a first living word? Maybe you are an Anne. You stand beside someone who tantrums in frustration because the world has not yet given them a grammar. Your work is slow, repetitive, underappreciated, and crucial. Do you keep going? Yes, because one day a student will tilt their head into stillness and then sprint toward everything, and you will be there breathless, laughing, spelling as fast as your fingers can move. Maybe you are a parent who refuses the institution, a designer deciding whether to add a feature that helps a few but helps them completely, a friend who thinks to ask, "How can I make this easier for you?" Maybe you are all three, on different days. The question is not whether darkness exists. It does. The question is whether we build windows. Helen's life says, yes, build them. Learn the hinges. Share the blueprint. Light you can carry. Let us end where we began. Eyes closed, ears covered. In this quiet, imagine a garden at dusk. Air cooling. The smell of earth and leaves rising. A woman sits with a straight back and calm hands. She cannot see the purple spreading westward. She cannot hear a bird settle into a branch. But she knows both are happening. She knows because she knows the world, and because someone once spelled it into her hand until it bloomed. She turns her face toward where the sun was an hour ago and smiles. Keep your face to the sunshine, she liked to say, and you cannot see the shadow. So keep moving, keep learning, keep believing. Name the things around you until they become yours. Hold the ladder, climb it, pass it back down. Install another window, make another door. Because the miracle at the water pump was never only about one word. It was about the lifetime that followed, and the lives that would follow after that, including yours. What will be your water moment? Who will be your Anne? And for whom will you be hers? The world is full of suffering. It is also full of the overcoming of it. Carry that sentence with you like a small, bright lamp. Let it light your way home.